Hi everyone, my name is David Lincecum and I'm a certified Ayurvedic educator. I study Ayurveda with the Kanyakumari School of Yoga and Ayurveda in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And my offering to you today is a presentation that I do called Understanding Ayurveda, a complete yogic system of health. Most of us would probably agree that we live in a time when there is a need for healing on a different level. Albert Einstein once was quoted as saying that the significant problems that we face today cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. And I think that this is really true of where we stand with our health and well-being today. Here in July of 2012, access to healthcare is practically framing our current political debate and our current election that's upcoming. What's called for now is a new level of thinking. And Ayurveda is poised at a good place to reemerge and be very helpful to our society right now. There are several reasons for that. One is that Ayurveda is largely self-directed over time. It really asks you to work with a practitioner in the beginning and on an ongoing basis, but over time, as you learn the methods, the system becomes more self-directed. And it allows you to take more personal responsibility for your health. When you start to learn about the makeup of your body and the makeup of your mind and how different things affect you, then you're able to make better choices. Ayurveda is also, it's intuitive. And this is part of that learning process that takes place over time. It breaks the dependency that has developed between provider and consumer, very apparent in our Western health system all over the world, but especially in the United States. And one other thing that I find about Ayurveda is that it has a strong feminine voice. And from my perspective, Western medicine has a very strong masculine voice. It's all about getting in there and fixing problems and getting you back to fixed up, and as a male, I completely understand where I push people in that direction myself. Ayurveda has a stronger feminine voice in that it asks you to listen inwardly, to care for yourself over time, and to notice how practices that you may have, or substances that you may take in, or foods that you may eat, how they affect you. So it's a good time for Ayurveda. What is Ayurveda? Well, it is a system of health and well-being that was developed in India right alongside of the yoga traditions. So it's credited with being, up to 5,000 years old. Ayus meaning life and Veda meaning knowledge. It is the knowledge of how to live skillfully, I often like to say. And depending on who you're talking to, Ayurveda is probably the oldest medical system on earth. It's also very comprehensive, so it treats every aspect. It's not limited to just one aspect of the human body or the human mind, but it has psychological aspects and physical aspects that work throughout the whole body. Ayurveda teaches us that there are three main causes of disease. And when you think about these, they're not going to be that surprising. I love this first point, unwholesome conjunction of the senses with the objects of their affection. And that's a very sophisticated way of saying we get overly attached and addicted to things, especially things that we take into our body. This is probably most apparent to most of us with regard to things like food and alcohol and all of these kinds of things that we like the way they make us feel, and so we make them part of our daily life, no matter what effect they may have on us. The second point, failure of the intellect, is actually a beautiful Sanskrit word called prajnaparad, which means this failure of the intellect. This means that we have this unwholesome conjunction with these objects, and in many times we know that they're not good for us, and we've seen and recognized the effect that they'll have on us, but we continue to use them anyway. Okay, my classic example is the photo on your screen of what looks like to be a college student taking beer from a beer bong. If you've ever done this, perhaps in your younger days, you know that this is a method of pouring beer directly down your throat into your stomach. It's prajnaparad, it's failure of the intellect. It makes no sense, but we do it anyway. And the third main cause of disease is time and motion. And in this sense, of course, time is something that we don't feel like we have a lot of control over, but in fact we do. The speed at which we live, the choices that we make about our daily life, the amount of moving around we do versus the amount of downtime that we have, and the dramas of our life, and the way that we either choose to get caught up and live in those dramas or choose to sit back and observe the dramas with a little more detachment, makes a difference in our health. And I think most of us have probably noticed that over time, that when we're caught up in these dramas, we have a tendency to get sick. We don't feel right, and our bodies and our minds become disturbed. Behind these causes of disease, there is a primordial cause of disease, which is kind of backing up a level to away from the physical level into the spiritual level, to the emotional level, to the intuitive level. We have forgotten our true nature as spirit. If we were to remember who we really are, if we were to always be connected back to source, then we would make choices that were good for us at all times. And this is something that we have lost over time. There was a time when humans were more connected with this, and when spiritual practice and knowledge that we are spiritual beings having physical experiences was more apparent in the lifestyles that people were living. I love this quote from Harvey Cushing, the pioneer of brain surgery, who suggests that the physician must view man in his world more than just the diseased organ. And I feel that many aspects of Western medicine have lost track of this over time. Ayurveda defines perfect health as a Sanskrit word, using a Sanskrit word called svasta. Sva meaning self and sta meaning established. So it's established in the self. And this is two selves. This is our greater self with the capital S, meaning we're connected back to our true nature as spirit, and that we have positive self-esteem about the more localized self, the smaller self that lives here on the earth, that takes action in this world. Perfect health is being established in both of these. It's feeling good about who we are locally and knowing who we are on a larger level. And this self-concept is something to focus on for just a moment. This self with a capital S being more of the complete person, the part of us that's connected to something greater, and the part of us that ultimately wishes to serve. Yoga, classical yoga, and the paths of classical yoga seek to uncover this part of us. And then there's the self with the lowercase s. This is the local, the body, the local mind, and the ego, which ultimately is seeking attention, assurance, and praise. Ayurveda, interestingly enough, it seeks to ensure that this local self is healthy so that the greater self can emerge. And a lot of times people find this a little confusing when I say that Ayurveda is the physical side of yoga, the medical side of yoga, the side of yoga that's concerned with the health of the body. Because Western yoga has become very physicalized, and there's far more focus on the benefit of the asanas in terms of physical strength and endurance than there is on the classical path of yoga, which is more concerned actually with psychological well-being. Yoga and Ayurveda are inseparable together. They're sister sciences. And when we approach things from an Ayurvedic perspective, we are approaching them from a yogic perspective. They're like two sides of the same coins, the heads and the tails. Yoga, the paths of yoga, classical yoga, form the psychological treatment plan of Ayurveda. And the psychological treatment plan in Ayurveda has equal weight, or perhaps even more weight, than the physical treatment plan, because Ayurveda teaches us that all illness and sickness ultimately begins on the spiritual plane, on the psychological plane, on the energetic plane, and eventually moves to the physical plane. Now, on the other side of that coin, the Ayurvedic lifestyle, diet, and practices are very supportive for those who are on the spiritual path of yoga. Ayurvedic practices, just as the yoga practices do, prepare the body to be a conductor of this great spiritual energy that it's possible to come about during these yogic practices. So in this sense, yoga and Ayurveda are really perfect partners for each other. Ayurveda also talks about the 4 goals of life, and they're listed on your screen now as kama, artha, dharma, and moksha. And kama is the part of us that wishes to pursue pleasure. And Ayurveda is all about balancing skillful action and what I've referred to as unskilled action in these 4 pursuits. And you'll probably be able to recognize where you are in these different areas. Kama asks us to pursue pleasure. Unskilled action says that we are going to overindulge our senses. Artha means that it's normal for us to become prosperous in order to support our dharma. Unskilled action would say that greed and accumulation will come about. Dharma says that we will find our divine purpose. But an unskilled action is that we seek status and we abuse power. And moksha means that ultimately we are pursuing liberation of the individual soul. We are seeking that from which we came. We want to connect back to spirit, to that pure consciousness that we emerged from. And it's possible that on that path we could develop spiritual arrogance. I'm further along in my path than this person or that person. So all of us at some point in our life, we're pursuing all 4 of these goals. We just may be unaware of it for much of our lives. Let's take a look at the difference between Ayurveda and Western medicine. Ayurveda, of course, has an extreme focus on wellness, diet, and emotional balance. And in Western medicine, you'll find some focus on wellness and diet, pretty low connection with what we are feeling emotionally and how that is affecting our physical health. And depending on what kind of doctor you go to and what that doctor's background is, you may find more or less of that. Ayurveda says that digestive health is the very core of most disease. And Western medicine views digestive disturbance as more of a symptom than it is actually what's at the core of the disease. I find that this is changing even today. The yoga studio where I teach, just across the road, they're building a very large digestive care clinic, the University of Wisconsin. And even in Madison, Wisconsin, I drive around now, I see that there are billboards up from Meritor that says digestive health is curing cancer. So Western medicine's starting to get a handle a little more on what digestive disturbance does to the body. Their treatment methods are very different. Ayurveda uses holistic treatment with herbs, lifestyle, sense therapies. Western medicine tends to lean toward invasive, powerful treatments and long-term use of powerful drugs with very significant side effects. This is where I feel that Western medicine has a very decidedly masculine voice, is in the form of treatment. Western medicine does have excellent diagnostics, and you could say that is decidedly masculine voice as well. Those diagnostics are very useful even for the Ayurvedic practitioner. Ayurveda says that the healing regimen will be slow and steady. It will take months and years. Western medicine seeks really fast symptomatic results using those powerful drugs. And this has changed the way that individuals like myself, like yourself, view the way we should be able to heal. Why am I not getting better? I should be getting better sooner. Ayurveda requires patience. It allows us to step back and look at that the disease process took a long time and that the healing process will equally take some time. Ayurveda is not a substitute for Western medicine. In fact, it's an excellent complement to someone who's being treated by Western medicine. And the longer that you are practicing your Ayurvedic practices, the deeper you move into the Ayurvedic lifestyle, you should find that you have reduced reliance on Western medicine. So digestion I mentioned earlier, Ayurveda says that digestion is the single biggest factor affecting our health. And in fact, it locates the physical manifestation of disease when it moves from this psycho-spiritual level into the physical level, that it all really comes from three different places. One being the stomach, two being the small intestine, and three being the large intestine or the colon. These are generally the original sites of physical disturbance in the body. And all of us have experienced digestive disturbance that we would maybe describe as mild or transient. Those are signs of what is happening to us on a physical level. And those symptoms that we might tend to describe as mild or transient, coming and going, will worsen over time. And this is where we oftentimes lose track of them. We don't connect what's happening to us physically back to these digestive symptoms, but Ayurveda does that for us. Now, this is my my question slide. Unfortunately, because it's recorded, you can't ask me questions, but I'm happy to get your questions via email, and you can find that at my website. So let's go into Ayurvedic theory now. And part of this relies on us understanding that Ayurveda is both a philosophy and a science. And that's one of the things that makes it unique as well, is that it has this philosophical background. And that philosophical background begins with a little story about how the world came to be. And that story says that when the world came to be, there was a great combining of two powers. They're oftentimes called Purusha and Prakriti, Shiva and Shakti, Shiva and Parvati. They're represented in different ways. But this is a masculine and a feminine power that came together, and the Western scientists would refer to this as the Big Bang. And what occurred was a Big Bang. But in fact, in an Ayurvedic sense, in a yogic sense, this was a big Om. And what emerged from this was the sound of Om, which was the sound of creation. And what emerged from the sound of Om, eventually on a physical plane, on an energetic plane, were these five elements. And those five elements are space or ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And you can think of these five elements as having a gross physical manifestation and as also having a far more subtle energetic manifestation. And we'll talk about that as we go along. But remember that it all kind of comes back to these five elements. From an Ayurvedic point of view, out of these five elements fall three what we call the doshas. And these doshas are energetic systems that work on a local level within our bodies and within our minds. The dosha of Vata is formed from air and ether. The dosha of Kapha is formed from water and from earth. And the dosha of Pitta is formed from fire that is encased or surrounded by water. So these pairs of elements form these doshas. And these doshas are the very trinity, if you will, of Ayurveda. Everything that happens in the body, everything that is happening in the mind can be explained by the actions of these doshas. Ayurveda also says that each of us has a natural balance of these doshic energies in our bodies that makes us absolutely 100% unique as individuals. We call it a prakriti. It's our natural doshic balance determined at conception. And we generally find this prakriti in structural diagnosis and pulse diagnosis. Now you can go online and you can find plenty of dosha tests at all kinds of various websites. The only problem with those dosha tests is they will tend to identify your balances and your imbalances equally because you're just answering questions. In Ayurveda, our current situation with regard to imbalance is represented by the word vikruti. It is our doshic imbalance, and it's determined by our functional symptoms. So when you try to determine your prakruti, what is my dosha, is what we oftentimes call it. What's my dosha? Based on this dosha test, I'm a vata. Well, you may be experiencing a lot of vata symptoms, and therefore when you answer the questions on the test, you may say, I'm a vata, when in fact, you might not be a vata. There might be naturally less vata in your constitution than you're currently experiencing. And that's why working with an Ayurvedic practitioner is important. An Ayurvedic practitioner will use different methods like the structural analysis, pulse diagnosis. They will get to know you a little better, and the signs of your dosha, your natural balance, will appear over time. But for right now, we can just remember that each of us has a natural balance of prakriti, and each of us, or most of us, have a vikruti, which is our current state of imbalance. Those are the two things that we're going to work with. Now, next we have to know that what we recognize in Ayurvedic science, what we recognize in yogic science, are qualities. And these qualities they're referred to in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras as the pairs of opposites. There's a section of the Yoga Sutra which talks about how the plays of the pairs of opposites are what kind of governs our life until we reach this state of yoga or union. And they're listed on your screen, and to some degree they're kind of obvious. Things can be cold or hot or heavy or light or wet or dry or smooth or rough. What we have to think about is these qualities in terms of their gross manifestations, something that is physically smooth or physically rough, but also in their more subtle manifestations, whether the energy that you're feeling is heavy or light, whether the food that you're eating is heavy or light, whether it's cloudy or clear, whether your yoga practice has a denseness to it or a flowing quality to it. These qualities are apparent in the doshas, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. They're also apparent in substances that we eat, take into our bodies, in terms of the activities, the air we breathe, the atmosphere can have these qualities. Everything in life is affected ultimately by these pairs of opposites. So, what is my dosha? Well, ultimately, you could go online and take one of these little dosha tests, and you can learn a little bit about yourself. As I've said, it probably won't be very accurate, but even so, it can give you an idea, and you could start to kind of look at what you're experiencing doshically in any kind of daily life. But ultimately, you want to work with an Ayurvedic practitioner to help you determine what your dosha is. And in fact, what's oftentimes more important than what your dosha is, because it may not emerge for some time, is what is your current state of imbalance? What kinds of symptoms are you experiencing that are out of the ordinary, and how can we work on them? Well, let's talk a little bit about these doshas on a one-on-one basis. And the first dosha we'll speak of is Vata Dosha. Vata Dosha is the dosha of movement. Vata is all about creativity, flexibility, and movement. And everything in the body that moves as a result of Vata Dosha. That includes the circulation of our blood and our lymph, the movements of our arms and our legs, even a slight shudder we may have, or a chill when we get cold, and a shivering. That shivering is a result of Vata Dosha. And what's listed on your screen are also the qualities of Vata Dosha that become very important. That Vata is cold. It is the coldest of the three doshas because ether or space is one of the elements that makes up Vata Dosha, and therefore it is very, very cold. It's the coldest that it can be in space. It's light. It's very light, air and ether. It's very dry, air and ether. It's mobile. Air gives it that mobile quality. It's rough, which may seem confusing, but if you think about the action that moving air can take on a canyon, the Grand Canyon, or rocks that are being formed by this movement of air and shaped by this movement of air. It can be rough. It is hard. It's dry. It has a sharp quality. It is clear because ether and air have that clear quality. It is subtle because they are two subtle elements. And it is also flowing. Now, if you look at the chart that I provided on your screen of what is Vata in balance and what is Vata like out of balance, you can scan down that list and you can kind of say, well, these are some aspects of me. Because these three doshas are present in our bodies, each of them to some extent. But most of us have one or the other of these doshas that takes a primary role. Vata will tend to present itself in a balanced state as flexibility, agility, mentally, imaginative, people who can be fast and lively communicators. They might have pale, kind of cool skin, small, bright eyes. Their frames are generally thin and slight. Their bones tend to be a little longer than they are dense. And they tend to be natural teachers, artists and actors and healers. This expressive quality and this imaginative quality makes them good for these kinds of things. When Vata is out of balance, well, you will find that you could become flighty, agitated, confused. You could experience fear, anxiety. The fast, lively communication turns into kind of overly expressive babbling. And then the sharp quality comes in, which gives that communication a shrill quality. The pale, cool skin becomes a very cold body that's uncomfortable. And the skin can become dry and rough rather than pale and cool and smooth. Vata's bright, lively eyes become nervous and shifty. And their appearance, that is fairly light and subtle, will become more emaciated, dried. They have a wasting quality. And where in balance there, these lovely teachers and actors and artists, out of balance, Vata can lead to mental illness or self-injuring, cutting of yourself, and those kinds of behaviors that are self-injuring emerge from, generally speaking, from elevations of Vata dosha energy in the body over a long period of time. And then you can see I picked up from the internet a little chart of some famous Vata people. Woody Allen being one of my very favorites in his creativity. Now, Vata dosha has a home, and each of these doshic energies has a home in the body where it lives naturally. And Vata's home is in the large intestine or the colon. And in the large intestine, its dry quality has the useful aspect of extracting from the food we eat in the final stages of digestion the moisture that is needed by the body and the final nutrients that haven't been extracted by the body in the previous digestive processes. Vata is increased in our body by cold, light, dry, and mobile qualities. So if you think about substances or activities that are cold, light, dry, and mobile, that is what is going to make Vata dosha increase in the body. It's balanced or decreased by warm, heavy, moist, and stable qualities. Vata's digestive symptoms, and if you recall, I said this is what is at the very core of where illness begins on a physical level, are generally speaking constipation and gas. When Vata energy is very high in the body, we'll experience a lot of gas from the colon, and our bowel movements will tend to be dry and hard, and there might be straining involved in having that kind of bowel movement. At the same time, mentally, it may present itself as worry and anxiety and fear. And when we find that we're living with these kinds of emotional symptoms, we can begin to trace that back to high levels of Vata energy in the body. Vata is also irregular. It is not structured. It is irregular. It's this flowing, subtle movement that makes that happen. And so when we have irregularities in our body, I've shown on screen an arthritic condition where the fingers are not straight. They're not occurring in a regular physicality. This is also a sign of a Vata type of imbalance that is causing this form of disease. And it's manifested physically as irregularity in the shape of the body. You can find that throughout the body. Any kind of features you have physically that are irregular. Some of us have a face that's slightly irregular, or eyes that are different sizes, or a brow that is raised on one side or the other. That's a Vata feature in the body. It doesn't mean necessarily that you are a Vata Dosha person, but all of us have each of these, and the energetic forms of Vata, Pitta, Kapha will present themselves in different ways within the body. A famous Vata, Sarah Jessica Parker, very creative actress, as most of us know, and she's seen here. One of the reasons I chose this picture is you can see that a Vata face is a fairly long face. Hey Vata, why the long face? She has a lot of makeup on in the lower picture. In the upper picture, I want you to look at her hand. When you look at the back of her hand, what you will see is a very Vata presentation of a hand. The fingers are long. The hand itself is a little bony. Her skin appears to be maybe a little dry, a little thin. You can see the veins in the back of the hands. The joints are fairly prominent in the fingers and the knuckles. The thumb is fairly long. So that's kind of a classic presentation of a Vata hand. You can even see the skin a little wrinkled at the joints. It appears to be a little bit dry. And of course, she's quite made up in the lower picture, so it's a little more difficult to extract features there. But the prominent feature I see there is her long fingers and her long face. Now we'll go to Pitta Dosha. And Pitta is this fiery dosha made up of fire and water. And it is the dosha of transformation, the dosha of vision, and the dosha of digestion. And Pitta is apparent in any kind of transformative process within the human body. When things change form, this is a Pitta process. Just as with Vata, when things move, this is a Vata energy process. Pitta is transformation. If you think about vision in the eyes is a Pitta process. Light comes in, and then images are formed out of that light, and there is a transformation from light into image and knowledge, and we understand this. This is digesting the light and having it change forms. And the qualities are hot and light. It is dry, slightly oily. It is mobile. It has a sharpness as well, like Vata. And it's rough. If you think about the fire and exposure to fire kind of drying things out, making them rough and brittle. It is subtle, just like fire is subtle. Kind of, you can picture the flames kind of wisping around. It is hard, clear, you can see through the fire, and flowing also, which is something that both fire and water would have. And so in balance, Pitta is presented as understanding, intelligence, vision. When you say, I see, this is kind of a Pitta response to some stimulus. The Pitta might normally have bright, sharp eyes. Generally speaking, there's a light in the eyes of Pitta. It is a light of understanding, a light of discernment. And Pittas might have warm, rosy skin, whereas the Vatas had the cool, paler skin. Pittas will tend to run towards the redness a little bit. They typically, in balance, are going to be courageous, brave. They might be a person that you would refer to as having clarity, focus, a passionate person. Generally speaking, they're assertive and confident. They tend to be entrepreneurial and kind of get out and lead, where Vata presents creativity and interesting and original thought. Pitta can give that thought more form in terms of organization and leadership of that thought. And therefore they tend to fall into, and of course they could be anything they wanted to be in terms of profession, but they might tend to think in the way of a scientist, a lawyer. They emerge as great spiritual teachers because the light that they present allows people to understand and to comprehend and to digest the spiritual ideas that are being presented. Now, out of balance, of course, they present a very different appearance, a very different behavior. That understanding and intelligence turns to anger, jealousy. Whenever we're experiencing heated kinds of emotions, we're experiencing Pitta types of emotions in the mind. The bright, sharp eyes become more angry and bloodshot. The warm, rosy skin could become inflamed, red, oily. Rashes and boils are things that are Pitta types of eruptions in the skin. And where they were courageous and brave, now they're burned out, they're reckless. The light that is in their eyes becomes so bright that instead of seeing clearly, instead of casting a clear light, they become blinded. And their intensity level is raised. And their leadership goes from being assertive and confident to aggressive and demanding and take no prisoners. And where they were lawyers and leaders and spiritual leaders, what are they now? They're mob bosses ordering killings of people. They are serial killers or criminals. They might use that assertive, confident mind, that courageous bravery in the out of balance state to commit crimes and to plan things and carry them out. So, of course, I'm presenting the full imbalance and the full out of balance picture, and there's an entire spectrum of behaviors and physical manifestations that will take place along that entire spectrum. Famous Pitta people, Sting being one of my favorites. Nicole Kidman, if you look at her face, it has a lot of sharp qualities. You can see the light in her eyes is bright and shining. The tip of her nose is kind of pointed, the nice straight bridge of her nose. President John F. Kennedy, known for kind of his ruddy complexion, he showed that courageous bravery, that passion and clarity as he was running for office. Now, Pitta has a home as well, and that home is in the small intestine. And this small intestine represents the point in our digestive system where the food is really being processed through and we're extracting and changing the form of the energy and the nutrients in the food so that they can be absorbed by the body. Pitta is increased by hot, light, oily, and unstable qualities, and it's balanced by cool, heavy, moist, dry, and stable qualities. Its digestive symptoms, those things that we will feel maybe transiently and mildly, are generally things like heartburn and diarrhea, where the Vata type of bowel movement is dry, hard, and difficult. Pitta has this high digestive fire that kind of allows them to burn through food. So they could eat foods and then maybe have a loose bowel movement. It might be a little bit warm at times. Or they might experience heartburn that starts in the stomach and moves up into the chest. And mental symptoms that may present themselves are things like anger and resentment and those hot emotions that we talked about. All of these are signs of more Pitta, maybe too much Pitta in the body. That red rosacea in the cheeks, red rashes on the body, or a yellowing of the skin is also a sign of a Pitta imbalance in the body. And from a famous Pitta point of view, we have an actor, Tom Cruise. Now, if you look at the upper right-hand corner of your screen, you see that look in the eyes, and of course he's probably acting here, and there's probably been some Photoshop done on this, but you see a little bit of that dark side of Pitta in those eyes. There's a light there. They come out and grab you, and there's a little bit of mystery there. There's a little bit of perhaps fear there. The body of the Pitta is shown in the lower right-hand side of the screen. They tend to be fairly muscular people, and they tend to present themselves with broad chest, where Vata tends to be kind of thin and the bones are longer than they are heavy. Pittas are a little more in the middle. The bones have a little more mass, and they tend to be physically fairly interesting specimens, or fairly muscular specimens. You see his hand in the lower left. The Pitta hand is more moderate. It'll be a little more fleshy than the Vata hand. The fingers tend to be a little bit tapered towards the end. The palm will be square, and the fingers are more of moderate length in matching the palm than the Vata hand. And then the face, you will notice in the upper right-hand corner, you can really see that Pitta has an angular face. It's presented very much in the jawline that we see with Tom Cruise here, the angularity from his jaw to his chin. Also, the bridge of the nose is medium and usually fairly strong. A classic Pitta nose has quite a point at the end. The eyes are often deep set, and as I said, the eyes will kind of draw you in. Now we'll talk about Kapha Dosha. And Kapha, it's also pronounced Kapha sometimes, but Kapha Dosha is the dosha of form, of lubrication, of stability. So anything in the body that is taking form, the building of tissues, for instance, is a Kapha type of energetic process. Kapha has these qualities that you see on screen, very much opposite of what you saw for Vata. Kapha is cold and wet. It is heavy. That is that sense of form that needs to happen. It is oily, stable. It is dull, soft, cloudy, dense, and gross. And gross meaning it's obvious. Subtle in the Vata characteristics, meaning not very noticeable. Gross meaning it's very noticeable. So Kapha people themselves tend to have more of these types of qualities. They tend to be a little more stable and heavy. Their skin is soft, or they have a softness about their person. Now, in balance, the Kapha person is one of love, calmness, forgiveness. They're patient. Their steady, strong frame is comforting. Okay, when they hug you in, you feel their strength. They'll have the soft, milky kind of skin. It's a little thicker than the other two doshas. And their eyes are very soft. I've heard it described that the Kapha person has eyes that are filled with milk. They're very grounded people. They tend to be the person you might say, you are my rock of Gibraltar. You're always there for me. They adapt a little more slowly to change. That's that stable, heavy quality. And they're calm. They're slow to react. The Kapha person doesn't forget things. The quality of cloudiness means that maybe they learn things a little more slowly, but once the information is in there, that cloudy quality means the information is held. If you think about looking into water and seeing particles that are suspended in the water, you can think of that as the information that's suspended in the Kapha mind. So they're like the elephant. They never forget. And their body has those elephant qualities as well, strong, stable, noticeable. Now, in balance, they make peacemakers, nurturers, counselors, psychologists, people that you can rely on. Out of balance, they present a very different appearance. That love and calmness and forgiveness turns into attachment and greed, conditional love. They can hold a grudge. That's that cloudy quality of never forgetting. Yeah, they'll never forget what you've done to them and hold that grudge when Kapha is out of balance. And where their strong, steady frame becomes obese and they become kind of an oily person, their skin becomes cold and their eyes become cold and heavy, Kapha is moving out of balance. Their groundedness turns into stubbornness. Their slow adaptation turns into I won't change kind of adaptation. And their calmness and slowness to react turns into the dullness and lethargic, difficult to teach. We've all experienced Kapha kinds of feelings when we say, my head is heavy. I can't understand what you're saying. That's a Kapha type of presentation. And where they were peacemakers, now they're kind of people who are stuck. They're people who are not able to take action in this world or action in their lives. And people who've never changed. And they will tend to get depressed, where Vata people will tend towards anxious types of disorders, fear types of disorders. Pitta people will tend towards anger and lashing out types of disorders. Kapha people will tend towards depressive types of disorders, isolation, and that aloneness. And of course, famous Kapha people, Oprah Winfrey being one of the biggest examples. The Reverend Martin Luther King, if you look at his face there, you just immediately see that it has that soft, stable quality. There's a heaviness to his appearance, but it's not overly heavy, it's grounded. It's a cool kind of appearance. Kapha Dosha, its home is in the stomach. And it is increased by these cold, heavy, moist, and stable qualities. And it's balanced by warm, light, dry, and mobile qualities. If you remember Vata Dosha, you begin to recognize that Kapha and Vata are kind of opposites of each other. The digestive symptoms that are Kapha related generally are things like nausea, sluggishness, bloating, water retention, slow, heavy digestion. So if you've ever eaten that big Thanksgiving meal and then you just sat at the table afterwards and held your stomach and said, oh, it feels like it's all just sitting there, that's a Kapha type of presentation. And the mental symptoms for Kapha people are generally, as I said earlier, depression, stubbornness, melancholy. So when you feel yourself dug in on a position, I am not changing, it's a Kapha type of mental presentation. And of course, the Kapha person is the most likely to tend to gain weight over time. This is the big thing that they fight. Where the Vata person is fighting a wasting type of symptom where they cannot gain weight and they're becoming too thin. The Pitta person is fighting generally an inflammation type of presentation. The Kapha person is the one who's kind of struggling with their weight and with retention and too much tissue forming in their body. And Oprah Winfrey, classic example of the Kapha person. Of course, those of us who have watched Oprah over time, certainly since I was a young person, Oprah's been on TV. We've watched Oprah struggle with her weight. She's been very outward and open about that. And we've seen her in a small state, and we've seen her accumulate tissue and skin and fat and be in a larger state as well. But you can see the soft qualities that are presented in her face. The smooth roundness of the Kapha face, the broadness of the nose, the ridge of the nose, the broadness of the forehead. And her hand is pictured here. You know what's great about Google now is you can Google Oprah Winfrey's hands and you can get pictures like this, which I just took off the internet. Her hand is kind of a classic Kapha presentation. It's a very square palm, and the fingers are fairly short and stubby. So when you deal with those people who look like they have little sausages for fingers, that's kind of that Kapha hand. You have to pardon my presentation of it. I don't need to present it in a dark light, but it's those short, kind of stubby fingers. And also, if you look at her palm, you get a sense of the moisture level of her body. There's a kind of a fullness in her skin, whereas Sarah Jessica Parker's hand looked kind of dry. Oprah's hand has that moist and oily kind of quality that's associated with Kapha Dosha. And so those are the three doshas. And of course, normally I would be taking questions at this time, but since I'm recording this, I'll just summarize by saying that we could remember that the doshas at their most base level are simply energetic systems that are present in the body. The energy of movement, the energy of transformation, the energy of form. And everything that is happening in the body from a physiological standpoint is a result of the interplay of these three energies, right down to the cellular level, when the cell is forming new cells, when the cell is taking in oxygen, when the cell is taking in nutrients, when there is movement within the cell. All of these are a result of the three doshas. And similarly, mentally and emotionally, what we're feeling, what we're experiencing in terms of our minds is also this interplay of the three doshas in our bodies. And these definitely do form this trinity of Ayurveda. We explain everything in Ayurveda as a result of the doshas and their relative levels of balance or imbalance. So with all of that in mind, we could say, then why do we get sick? And generally speaking, or maybe even specifically speaking, we get sick because we have doshas in excess. And if you think about it, many of the diseases that we find in the world today have to do with excess. When the doshas are in excessive amounts in our body, it affects our digestion. That's the bottom line. that our digestive processes depend on these doshas, and they depend on them being in balance. What happens is that the doshas tend to accumulate. And they accumulate because of actions that we take as individuals. This is where we get into our kind of personal responsibility. Once we start understanding how the things that we do in our day, the foods that we eat, the actions that we take affect the doshas, we learn that they experience an accumulation or a decrease based on these things that I've just touched on, these actions we take, these foods we eat. And the doshas ultimately accumulate to a point where they overflow and they leave their home sites of the stomach for kapha, the small intestine for pitta, the large intestine for vata. These are places where they live very naturally and where they belong, but when they accumulate in excess, they overflow and they begin to flow throughout the body. And when they flow throughout the body, they have a significant effect over time on the actions of the immune system and on the formation of our body's tissues and how those tissues present themselves physically. They have an action that they take on our emotions. All of this is happening simultaneously as these doshas flow throughout the body. And they flow throughout the body both in an energetic, very subtle form, also in a more gross physical form. So why do we get sick? We get sick because of the effect of the doshas when they flow in excess and they relocate out of their home sites to other sites around the body. That's what happens. And so Ayurveda says that the healing process itself is similar to the way that we got sick in the first place. So if you think about the way we got sick, it is this unwholesome conjunction of the senses with the objects of their affection. We ate too much of a certain type of food. The food was very dry and cool, and that dry, cool quality increased vata in our body, and we did it day after day after day, and we experienced vata types of symptoms. Well, the way that we reverse that is we change the diet, and we take in less dry substances, and we use therapies that are warmer and wetter, and we increase those qualities in our body, and therefore we end up reducing Vata Dosha. So these healing processes involve the five senses. They involve using taste and sight and hearing and smell and touch, and you can see how those different therapies are presented there with aromatherapy and massage and color therapy. Diet and herbs being the first two that generally we can look at to get the most effect very quickly. So herbs are one of the ways that an Ayurvedic practitioner works with these imbalances in our body. And in this sense, I've heard it said that the Ayurvedic practitioner is like a conveyor belt bringing qualities into the body that are not there or that are in a reduction state. The Ayurvedic practitioner is increasing those qualities in the body to balance out what we're experiencing as a result of the doshas in excess in other areas. The herbs, the beautiful thing about the herbs is that, well, they're botanical, for one thing. They're generally organic and natural, and they have a very subtle effect on the body. So unlike the powerful drugs of Western medicine, the herbs come into the body and work in a very subtle sort of way over the long term. The nice thing about the herbs too is that we can experience change more quickly from the herbs than we can from, for instance, the diet. Now, that is not to say that if we change our diet, we could experience change over a period of several days, over a period of a week or 2 weeks. Some of the herbs' actions will happen quite quickly. And what that does is it helps to move the body and the mind back into balance a little more quickly. And that has the result of helping you, the individual, start to make better choices. because ultimately the herbs have to be somewhat of a temporary fix. The herbs are correcting, bringing qualities into the body that are not there. And ultimately what we need to do is we need to be bringing those qualities into the body without the herb. But by doing it with the herb to begin with, we clear our minds and we have some correction or reduction in our symptoms. And now we're able to start processing more clearly what our role in the disease process is. So the herbs are a very beautiful treatment that the Ayurvedic practitioner has available, some of which are available over the counter. You might find them at natural food stores and things like that. But more specifically, the Ayurvedic practitioner will prepare herbs that are very specifically designed for the patient. Daily life is another part of this. Daily life really is key. There's probably no single thing that can affect you long term more than daily life and the food that you eat. And I guess I would have to put them fairly even, but maybe daily life even has a bit of an edge. You could probably eat foods that are not particularly wholesome, but if you have a very strong daily regimen, it will keep you in balance. Part of the reason for that is that one of the doshas is a little bit more problematic than the other two, and that is Vata dosha. Because it is the dosha of movement and it is generally unstable, it tends to be the dosha that changes more readily than the others. If you think about the contrast I made between Vata dosha and Kapha dosha, you could then begin to say, oh, Kapha dosha, being the most heavy and stable dosha, will tend to change more slowly. That would be true, and Pitta is in the middle. But if you bring your attention back to Vata, Vata controls the nervous system and therefore the mind. And it is extremely mobile. And if you think about what's happening in your mind, the impulses of the nerve from the senses into the mind and the repetitive thoughts that we have during the day, and everything that happens to us on a nervous level, nervous system level, is a result of Vata energy. And so Vata tends to be a bit of a problem dosha because it will go out of balance more quickly than the other doshas, and it has this connective kind of quality. As I said, Vatas are these naturally connective people. It will tend to drag its friends Pitta and Kapha along with it. So oftentimes Vata moves, and then Pitta and Kapha kind of come along in Vata's games that it's playing or the movements that it's making. Daily life and the regimens that we follow in our daily life help to keep Vata dosha stable and less mobile. And so one of the presentations that I give, and the presentation that I'll plan to be recording for you, is about daily routines, the yoga of daily life, and how staying on a regular schedule, doing the same things every day, when we eat our food and how we eat our food, and how we schedule ourselves and the amount of downtime that we give ourselves, and the amount of quiet time that we have, is a really important part of the medicine that Ayurveda presents. And some of you are starting to shudder at this. I can feel you in your homes watching this starting to kind of shiver a little bit, because if you think about how out of control our schedules are in our 21st century lives, it's hard to imagine that we could make a change to that. Ayurveda gently prods us in the direction of regularity, stability, lower amounts of mobility, and there we begin to see Vata dosha settle. And when Vata dosha settles, we're more successful at bringing our entire doshic system, that doshic tri-doshic kind of force that we have, that natural prakriti, back into balance. And then food as medicine. Well, the best medicine is the medicine that we take. And most of us take food every day. Most of us take food 3 or 4 or more times a day. And so the choices of what food we take become absolutely 100% key in our healing process, also very significant in the disease process. So how we eat and what we eat is pretty much ground zero, along with daily routine, for how healthy our body is going to be. And I can also feel you begin to shudder as I present this information, because food is definitely subject to being probably most prominent in the category of what we called the unwholesome conjunction of the senses with the objects of their affection. We all have foods that are the objects of our food affection. And this comes into the prajna parad, the failure of the intellect kind of model as well, where we tend to overeat and know that we are doing it. We tend to eat at the wrong times and the wrong types of food and know that we're doing it, but it's just so good that we can't drop it. And so Ayurveda prescribes for us a way to eat and types of foods that are unique to our doshas. We need to eat things slightly different based on the amounts of the three doshas that are naturally in our bodies. And based on the imbalances that we're experiencing at any given time, we need to change our diet. And as we change our diet, we begin to bring in these opposing qualities and change the way we feel, and ultimately change the physical way that our bodies work as well. So leave your drugs in the chemist pot if you can heal the patient with food, said Hippocrates. And then one other aspect of treatment is yoga as medicine. In the beginning of this presentation, I mentioned that these classical paths of yoga form the psychological treatment plan of Ayurveda, and that this psychological treatment plan is very, very important, because in order for us to make wholesome choices and get away from our addictions and our unwholesome conventions, we need to have a stable mind. And ultimately, classical yoga, while we consider it to be fairly physical, as most of us see it nowadays, it was all about having a stable, steady mind. And that stable, steady mind is probably the number one predictor of our ability to heal on a self kind of basis. So using asana, using meditation, using mantra, these classical yoga practices are very powerful ways to bring the body back into balance at any given time. The asanas have qualities that are useful in our Ayurvedic treatment. Asanas can be cold or hot. Asanas can be stable or mobile. And when we are experiencing imbalances, we can use asanas that have these opposite qualities to bring us back into balance. And then there are other healing techniques that are available to us, the most prominent of which is, from a classical Ayurvedic sense, is what is called panchakarma. And panchakarma is very deep cleansing of the body. You may have heard it said, I certainly know I have, by yoga teachers in the past, my issues are in my tissues. We are storing toxins in our bodies on a physical level, and we are storing toxins in our bodies on a psychological, psycho-emotional, psycho-spiritual level as well. The issues are literally stored in the tissues. And sometimes to get the issues out of the body, we need to cleanse the tissues. Panchakarma is a very old, tried and tested form of cleansing the body and cleansing the mind right down to a cellular level, releasing the cellular memory. Panchakarma is something that is not done alone. It's done with the help of an Ayurvedic practitioner who guides us through the process. It is something that we can do seasonally, or something that we can do periodically to release things from the body that have been stored. And it has miraculous, literally, and I'm not exaggerating, kind of miraculous results that can emerge from using Panchakarma over time. And you can learn more about Panchakarma from your Ayurvedic practitioner directly. Talking a little bit more about the Ayurvedic practitioner, what happens with an Ayurvedic consultation? Well, a practitioner like myself or other practitioners will do kind of an in-depth evaluation of you, your body, what's going on in your body, looking at the structure of the body and making some determination of what your prakriti is, what does it appear your natural doshic balance is, which is sometimes quite hidden. Sometimes it's quite masked by what the current imbalances and how long those imbalances have been in the body and to what depth those imbalances have gone into the body. The practitioner will talk with you about your lifestyle, your diet, quite a bit of focus on your diet, kind of the emotional tendencies that you are currently experiencing and have experienced over your life. And then, of course, most of us are brought here or brought to Ayurveda or whatever the healing modality it is by some kind of concerns that are presented as symptoms either emotionally or physically. And then the Ayurvedic practitioner will design for you a personalized program, and personalized is key because it's different for every single person. There is no standard method of treatment. In terms of designing a program that will bring you into balance using these five senses. Generally speaking, you'll be given a dietary program, which tells you what kinds of foods you need to avoid and what kinds of foods you need to bring into your weekly diet. You'll be given a lifestyle program that tells you and advises you on how much you should sleep, what you should do when you wake up, kinds of cleansing practices that you should bring into your life. And then also perhaps a yoga program. What kinds of yoga and meditation are best indicated for you, and what kinds of yoga practices might be imbalancing you further if you're doing them on a daily or weekly basis. They may also recommend practices for you that are panchakarma or cleansing type of practices. There are other types of Ayurvedic cleanses that are more gentle than panchakarma. It's not to say that panchakarma is ungentle, but it is a more deep clearing, and it requires a little more commitment and time from the patient. Where there are other cleanses that you can do in a more self-directed method at home to kind of clear some of these issues out of your tissues. So I can't really say enough about the importance of forming a relationship with an Ayurvedic practitioner. Generally speaking, probably the biggest thing that scares people away from this is cost, because typically Ayurvedic appointments are not covered under any kind of insurance program. But what I can tell you is that it's well worth your while and your investment. And generally speaking, you're going to see your practitioner 2 or 3 times over a period of 2 or 3 or 4 months. And then you're going to see them on a semi-regular basis. Depending on the level of the disease state in your body, you might need to see them every month or 2 months for a while. But generally speaking, as your knowledge grows and as your positive habits grow, you might get to a point where you only need to see them 1 or 2 times per year. Or maybe you're starting to do some of these panchakarma practices or cleansing practices on a yearly basis. Having that relationship ongoing with them is what will lead to long-term healing. The Ayurvedic practitioner is going to help you make these changes in your life. And then, of course, I'm mentioning that you'll be working with them regularly over a period of time, and they'll help you make these changes. I want to tell you that these changes are more difficult than you think they will be. When someone starts talking to you about changing your diet and not eating this kind of food so much anymore and eating more of this kind of food, initially you think, oh, okay, I can do that. And then when it comes down to the daily practice of doing that, it can oftentimes be a little more challenging than we think. So this leadership quality that the practitioner will take will help you through that. Well, that concludes this presentation on understanding Ayurveda. And I can assure you that I've only brushed the surface, but hopefully I've been able to just give you the basics of what you might need to consider whether Ayurveda might be a modality, a healing modality that's right for you. One thing that's great about Ayurveda is that it's not just about healing from a specific disease state. It's about just finding better overall balance and health in your life, no matter what your state may be. So I encourage you to seek out an Ayurvedic practitioner in your area. What do? I offer Ayurvedic health programs and coaching, yoga therapy, private yoga, and Ayurvedic education. And I'm happy to answer your questions anytime. You'll see my email and my web address listed at the bottom of your screen. Thanks for taking time to watch this presentation today. Good luck to you on your journey. Namaste.